If you're epileptic, this video will kill you. If you're a fan of eSports shooters like Counter-Strike or Overwatch, or really any video game with a ranked mode, chances are it's one of the only things that you do. I'm not trying to be mean, well, I am a little bit, but I'm speaking from experience. I spent a good amount of time playing VALORANT, not enough to ever be good myself, but for about a couple months I was tapped into every patch, played for hours every day, and spent time not just practicing, but researching how to practice. It wasn't my life, but it was pretty close. Then COVID ended, and I realized I was spending way too much time grinding ranked and not really getting anywhere considering the effort I was putting in. If you're treating these games very casually and you're just playing because it tickles you pink, you're probably having a great time. These aren't unfun games per se, but when your goal is to improve and to become a better player, it sometimes feels like the game is working against you and artificially extending the process. I want it to be really good, a ranked demon of sorts, but the journey to get to that point is littered with a lot of bumps in the way. Big problem number one, my rank is not always in my hands. Listen, excuses are excuses, but sometimes your teammates are just butt. Sometimes they're evil hobgoblin motherfuckers, sometimes your internet shits itself. Loads of things can happen that aren't really a test of your skill and are just a matter of circumstance. In short, it's basically never my fault.
Sandwich.
What just happened?
Sandwich.
What? I just blacked out. The second problem is that rank systems are not a perfect way of indicating skill. To stabilize against all the extra variables in matches, like having 10 people in a game, skill-based matchmaking does about as good a job as it can do, which isn't very good. And it's just not very pleasant to have a rank plastered to your screen after every game, sort of taunting you along into getting better. It makes it a lot easier to lose sight of playing for the love of the game in favor of tunnel visioning on just ranking up. And problem 3. Although moving your rank should be difficult, it takes time, maybe too much time. Most of the games I'm talking about are tactical and slow-paced. That's not the problem, I'm cool with that. The problem is that in the context of being a competitive shooter, where I'm playing to get better, each gunfight becomes a learning experience. If I die, I need to mentally note what I did wrong, and if I get a kill, I should maybe do whatever I did again. Every enemy encounter becomes valuable feedback that builds me up towards improving. But the vast majority of the time, you get into like 30 gunfights over the course of a whole match, and it's really unrealistic that you'll learn from everyone. What the fuck? So the amount of data that you have to work with is way downsized. It takes a long ass time to learn how to play by figuring out what you're doing wrong, because half the time you're not doing anything. Obviously, I know I can't just win one game and start competing in Pro League, but one game of VALORANT can last around 40 minutes, sometimes over that, and those 40 minutes account for a dent into my rank progression. It's never enough, so I'm always inclined to play more than one, which turns into maybe more than two, which turns into around a whole workday's worth of slamming my head into a wall. And I don't have time, man. I want to live. I don't want to go outside, but bragging every game is starting to make me think it might be a good idea. Okay, I'll be honest, I'm being real lazy and cynical here. For the sake of competitive integrity, sometimes these games have to be not so fun. And I understand that, and it's okay that having shit teammates is integral to the core design philosophies of multiplayer shooters. I'll just play something else. This is Hyperdemon. Say hi.
Hello.
Now, this definitely isn't a competitive esports shooter, and this is a little bit of a moron's comparison. If you were going to recommend something to a competitive shooter player, you would probably come out with a competitive shooter, which this is not. It is instead a fast-paced, single-player, arcade, what's another buzzword, horde shooter, where you're locked in a void with increasingly numerous skull creatures that you kill in the pursuit of a high score. And if you think of that high score as a substitute for a rank or elo placement, then you can start to see a connection forming between these two genres of games. But there's more in common than just chasing bragging rights. There's also a lot of DNA shared regarding the strategic or the Machiavellian, or in layman's terms, 2000 IQ moments. So in Counter-Strike, you and your team manage your economy so you can afford to fight on a level playing field against the enemy team. Good teams try to avoid poverty, but if their hand is pushed into a losing position, they have to get smart, allocating resources to their star player or peeling back to look for cracks in the enemy's defenses. Hyperdemon doesn't have money, instead it has gems dropped by enemies, which can be collected to make your piss stream of daggers temporarily turn into an acid hose. Instead of distributing these gems across teammates, you prioritize certain enemies and spend gems to hose them down. But there's not always really a tier list of enemies that you can blindly hunt down in order. While the same sequence of enemies spawn every run, their positions are always random, making it very difficult to rely on a formula of enemy prioritization. Even if you can make the right decisions, one misstep in the hosing process means losing the momentum that your gems yield. Not too dissimilar from Counter-Strike, without any gems, you've got to really play it close and carefully weave in between the ass cracks of enemies and look for a chance to gain back your momentum. The game is a teensy bit more fast-paced than your average tactical shooter, and yet it still manages to be a very, very focused experience that takes out a lot of the fluff and garbage that makes ranking up so frustrating. It leaves the grind entirely in your hands, and I think that this challenging mountain that it establishes combined with its more controlled learning environment creates a very compelling competitive experience that doesn't leave any time wasted. What the fuck? AAA competitive games kind of have this sanitized approach to visual design. In trying to establish a consistently fair environment, developers try to convey as much information as possible as transparently as possible. Enemies are made very distinguishable from the environment, securing a kill is made very obvious, and important audio cues are made to sound, well, important. It's a pretty big jump then from the smooth, relatively easy to understand visuals of something like Overwatch to then go to this. Very few games try to ship with an epilepsy warning. Hyperdemon does try to convey as much information as possible, but the transparency part kinda got dropped. For example, the game actually visually indicates when there's enemies behind you, but it does it by flashing your screen with red visions of them. The concept of 360-degree vision sounded really cool, but this kind of just feels like a limp dick slapping me in the eye every time it happens. I'd much rather just rely on my ears, which is considerably easier to do. The sound design is not nearly as loud as the visuals are. I mean, it does get loud, but what is relevant is always at the forefront of the soundscape. If there's an enemy hounding on your ass, you usually know. It never feels like pieces of information are eclipsing each other, even at peak entropy. The visuals, on the other hand, are so flashy and kind of obtrusive that they become almost baked into the game's difficulty curve, where just understanding what is happening on your screen becomes a fundamental skill that needs to be learned. A lot of games feel daunting at first and have a stage in their difficulty curves where a basic understanding needs to be developed before the game really makes sense. But Hyperdemon is even more steep in that regard because it feels like it's trying to lie to you at times. Like, this spawner enemy guy can disappear and respawn at a different location, and while they're doing that, they're invulnerable. The game telegraphs this by making them discolored and flickering. As a beginner, or me, someone with almost 200 hours, you might see one frame of this enemy there and act on it. I just thought it was me missing every time and being dogshit for a while. But no, that's just how it works, it's invulnerable. All this stuff is a trade-off for the game looking really, really cool. It definitely doesn't look like anything you've played before, and it does a lot to make you feel really good for doing really good. When you finally achieve a new personal best, you're able to watch your name soar past all the losers your score now towers over. At certain milestones, you even get a fancy colored dagger, and I didn't even have to gamble for this one. You get used to the visuals, really, you do. Most of the problems I have are minor nitpicks that don't rear their ugly little heads often. It's an art style that's a lot more ambitious than anything you'll find in most games, really, let alone an eSports shooter, and for that it already had my attention. But then, Hyperdemon proceeded to patch the 3 little competitive holes in my heart. Difficulty number 1, losing not necessarily always being your fault, has been vanquished. You have no teammates and you have no players for enemies. If we ignore the very few bugs and visual snagging points present in the game, pretty much every death is your fault. This is just how single-player games work, so it's a little unfair, but the point still stands if we're making the comparison. Which we are. There's no getting carried here. If you go up on the leaderboard, that's all you, little buddy. And there's no getting dragged down by teammates either. You have all the control over whether you do good or bad. And sure, you lose the complexity of fighting against real players or playing with your team. But when the fuck were you ever going to be able to coordinate a push with Queef? Dude, Age plays fragging out against us. The second problem of rank not necessarily lining up with your skill is also no more. As much as elo systems try to appropriately assess your skill level based on kills and assists and actually winning games, representing your skill as a numerical value inherently squishes it down to one dimension. I guess it's supposed to stabilize and work out over multiple games, but it still sucks to play a match giving it your all, do well, and still lose. If your team loses, you're gonna have to take the fall no matter how well you did individually, and that always feels like shit. In Hyperdemon, your high score both corresponds to your actual skill level and how your skill is represented. If you have a high score, you are good at the game. That's it. The number one player in the world is the guy with the biggest number. I'm not your therapist or anything, your score is never going to be a perfect way of assessing your value or skill, but it's better than a silly little badge. The game is built around your score rather than your score being built around the game. Counter-Strike has had a good gameplay formula for over 20 years, but it only started using an official elo system for matchmaking in the last 10. That is not true, I don't really know why I said that. Counter-Strike Global Offensive launched in 2012 and shipped with a competitive mode, making skill-based matchmaking in Counter-Strike something that elapsed more than 10 years ago. I thought it was a post-launch thing. What I'm trying to say is that the ranked mode was introduced late into the franchise and developed on top of the existing core gameplay. The whole point of Hyperdemon, at least for me, is to rack up a huge score and to get up there on the leaderboard. The score is the game. This is made most evident by how enemies spawn. Waves don't happen at a predetermined pace. Instead, they adaptively increase depending on how many enemies you've killed in a run. There is a cap, though, on the number of enemies at a given time that increases as you kill them. If you don't kill any enemies and just kind of flounder about, then the game will spawn them until it reaches the current cap and then stop. So if you're screaming and shitting your pants trying your best to kill anything at all, the game systematically gets a little slower, or rather stagnates its own pace so you don't get engulfed completely. There's a sort of matchmaking system going on there, where the game itself gets easier or harder depending on your pace. Not that the game never quite feels overwhelming, the game is kinda built to be an attack on the senses, but it's always pretty difficult to feel like you're dominating. It's a smooth curve that eases you into its challenge every time, and yet manages to feel exciting the whole way through. Problem number 3. Everything in these fucking esports games takes way too long. I appreciate a long, fought-for struggle to come out on top of a game, but I also appreciate having time for other things. It's a little nuts how much consecutive time it feels like you need to put in to get anywhere. What's that? Grandma fell down the stairs? Oh, sorry man, this is my rank-up game, there's nothing I can do. By stark contrast, Hyperdemon's runs are much shorter than competitive matches. You have to deliberately shit the bed and delay killing enemies for a run to go on for more than 5 minutes. Most completed runs sit between 2 and 4 minutes, and the better you are, the closer you're going to be to that 2-minute mark, maybe even surpassing it. But most of the time, you're not completing runs, you're staying alive for 30 seconds to a minute. And there's no competitive cooldown that you get if you somehow get bored and leave within that minute. So the minimum time commitment here is a lot smaller, and if you do put in the maximum amount of time, you'll probably still be spending less time than you would in an esports shooter because of Hyperdemon's crazy dick-beating replay system. This shit is life-changing, dude. I've watched a lot of YouTube guides that masquerade as video game Viagra, where the dudes advertise their overpriced coaching service, and it doesn't matter what game it is, they always tell you to do VOD reviews. Record your matches and then watch them over, figure out what you did wrong. And they're right, VOD reviews do help, but they take forever. That 40-minute VALORANT match is going to take another 40 minutes to watch back all the way through. Now, watching back your 2-minute replay doesn't take nearly as long as a 40-minute one. More recent or smaller competitive shooters usually don't even have replay systems. VALORANT's been out for 5 fucking years, and they're just now getting replays. In Hyperdemon, you can save clips and replays inside the game and watch them and share them all inside the game. And on top of that, on the leaderboard next to every person's name is a button that lets you see their replay. I can scroll all the way down to Wargoon, watch him flounder about for 20 seconds and go, this guy's good. And I can scroll all the way up to the highest guy and go, this guy is crazy good. The game is pretty hard. Being able to look at what the top players are doing is incredibly valuable for learning. The only thing that's really missing is a free cam, which I only felt the need for when I sat down to make this video. It also helps that Hyperdemon is not a multiplayer live service game for a lot of reasons, but namely that in 5 years from now, the game will be mostly the exact same. There will not be 20 new maps or characters that you have to now learn or any subsequent balance changes made to already existing content. I would be remiss to not at least mention the multiplayer mode. The thing is that it's accessed by pressing play on the menu here and then finding and right-clicking on a specific bird. Hyperdemon itself isn't a popular game, and so its secret, obscure multiplayer mode is going to be even less popular. It's also just never going to reach the same levels of complexity that a competitive team-based game will, which is fine by me. I'm not trying to crack the enigma or anything, I just want to feel like I'm doing a good job at something in a reasonable amount of time. And Hyperdemon really respects your time. Scroll down to the very bottom of the Steam page and you'll see the devs even remind you to take breaks and drink water. The point isn't to keep you playing and throwing money at skins, but to keep you trying. The gaming work shift is the main thing that irks me about esports shooters and esports games in general. The intended schedule of play feels like a 9 to 5. In the very paraphrased words of Naked Jacob from his very good video about Counter-Strike, if you're not playing, you're watching. And if you're not watching, you're learning. And if you're not learning, you're gambling. When your target challenge is no longer an ever-evolving circus of unemployed bums pretending to grind, and instead a humble single-player game waiting for you to tackle it, it gets a lot easier. Still, I'm just scratching the surface with learning all the game's facets. I think I had a unique experience with the learning curve in that I actually prioritized learning very flashy stuff early on, as opposed to very basic, boring stuff. And I wouldn't recommend that approach. I was so focused on doing advanced techniques and going really fast that I kinda ignored learning the fundamentals. I would just do stuff without really slowing down to think about what it was that I was doing and why I would do that. It led to a lot of friction building up and stopping me from progressing at a linear rate. Instead, my high scores were jumpy. I would go up like tens of points, which is a lot, every time because I would just keep banging my head against the wall without getting anywhere until eventually the stars would align for one run and all the crazy techniques I barely knew how to use would all work together magically. Then it was back to the usual of just sucking dick. If I have any advice for aspiring demons, you should try to play the game a little slower than you'd expect to and to think about what you're doing before you do it. I guess that seems pretty obvious when I say it out loud, but as basic of a concept as it is, it can kind of get lost in the heat of the moment. Like a lot of competitive shooters, Hyperdemon is pretty cut and dry with its tutorials. You learn how to shoot and what enemies do, but it gets a lot more complicated than that. And as a result, I often felt pretty aimless in what I was supposed to do. In the beginning, I would put the game down frustrated pretty frequently because I didn't feel like there was any progress. One thing that makes rank systems more enticing is that after every game, your rank updates. Not every game does this, but the ones that do are giving you feedback after every game. Yes, EVO systems can still feel like bullshit, but it's something to keep you playing. Hyperdemon doesn't have anything like that, and it almost sat in my library collecting dust forever because of that. Only ever seeing a change when you get a high score is a lot more gratifying than watching a number go up and down, but there's nothing outwardly motivating you to want to do all the work to get a high score in the first place. Unlike other single-player games, there's no fat on the bones of the game to maybe keep you going if you're not so interested in the game part of the game either. If you're the type of person to use video games as a form of escapism, playing them with your brain turned off so you can have them direct your mental trajectory for a bit, then I don't see this game being a great purchase. It could work, but any game could, and I wouldn't recommend Hyperdemon for that express purpose. There's no story, no characters, there's barely a world here. And really, that's the beautiful thing about it. There is no story, there is no lore, there's no progression, no slurs in your ear, it's purely a video game. From restarting being instant to the maximal game from the future aesthetic to the leaderboard being such a big deal, this is a video game optimized to be a video game. It always feels responsive, gratifying, and visceral. It took me about 150 hours to properly beat the game. Maybe most people do it a little quicker, but at the end of the day, that was all me. And nothing feels as good as getting to that top spot and knowing that you did that.
Yes! 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 300! Yes!
Listen, I like esports on paper. I still watch patch note recaps for a lot of games because I like how complicated they can get and how they evolve in spite of that. If you like playing esports titles and are complacent with that, more power to you. And I will not deny that it's a lot easier to be good at this game than it is something like Rainbow Six with all its 100 million characters and maps and gadgets and stuff. But for me, I'd found that it was very unfulfilling to try to pursue such a complicated task, and it was looking like something that would pretty much suck up all my time. Pair that with the ranked climb feeling very disconnected from what I was actually doing, and you've got a recipe that my parents would describe as an acquired taste. Yeah, I'm not having fun playing competitive games, but instead of lamenting about the death of X game, I'm just playing a different one. Hyperdemon did away with all the snagging points for me. It's a real simple setup, just a game and its leaderboard, and that's all I needed. And maybe you're the same way. If you really like getting good at video games and you want to play one that leaves nothing standing in your way to do that, then Hyperdemon is $15. And it's $5 if you buy it before July 28th.
I just wish the media would get hold of this and quit running it down. It's a good little town.
Yeah.
One thing about it, though, it keeps a lot of people away.
One sound.